Hi everyone, Adrian Groenewald of ThinkLead, the global leadership platform. It's great to be with you. And this is, of course, our Global Leadership Conversation 2. Last year, I went all over the world on Zoom and interviewed leaders for Global Leadership Conversation 1. This one is very important. It's also part of our vision, 2020 DAL. It's a 2020 decade of authentic leadership. So we've launched an authentic leadership revolution in which we want to expedite the emergence of authentic leaders, somehow do things differently in order to somehow eradicate the prevalence of toxic, incompetent, and maybe inexperienced leaders. The world needs better leadership, and we must do something differently. So we're engaging all these wonderful experts again, talking about authentic leadership, and I'm hoping to hit every continent as I did last year. Some of the same experts and influencers, certainly, and then also a few new ones. I've got with me today Marianne Roux. She was last year, and we had a very interesting conversation, certainly one of my favorites in the first round. All the way from Australia. She's just traveled, which was a very traumatic experience with the current drama that we have all over the world. And it's very sad, but we're learning a lot from that. But we won't talk about that today. She is a new world of work strategist and an expert on adaptive leadership, which we need so drastically at the moment. And she's an HR and transformational expert, MBA lecturer, and we're really privileged to have her with us. Marianne, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Marianne, same questions, and then we'll have our conversations in between. Let's make sure we're on the same page. Please explain to us what your understanding is of an authentic leader or leadership, authentic leadership as well. But more particularly, how do I identify an authentic leader? And is this the kind of leader we need right now?
I actually don't call them authentic leaders. I think what we mean is somebody that fits for the context that they're leading in and brings their whole self to it. And that would mean in our current context that that's a leader 4.0 with a clean understanding of the context of the fourth industrial revolution and the idea that people want meaning and purpose, and they want to connect on a human level with empathy, and they want to feel they belong. So for me, if that's what we mean by authentic leadership, that's probably what I would define as an authentic leader in the fourth industrial revolution.
Okay, so what do you call it? I mean, that I would put that under authentic leader. As you're right, it's all words, and we often mean the same things. But what do you call adaptive leadership?
I call it adaptive leadership or leadership 4.0, or sometimes we talk from fragile to agile leadership. The only reason we do that is because although I think authenticity is critical, I think it's been very misunderstood in the past. And, I think somebody could be a really authentic bully as well. I think Donald Trump is incredibly authentic. He's very much himself. He brings all of his worst traits to the job. And I think what we've got to be really careful is that we have a multi-layered understanding of leadership, and that people bring an ethical, mature, best version of self, including the capabilities required of digital design thinking and all those things, as well as the adult development level that they need. And in that way, they can bring themselves to the work. And sometimes it requires from us to pretend. Sometimes it requires from us to be more positive than we feel at the moment, because that's what the context and situation requires from us, especially right now. And sometimes we do have to do something that might not be quite what we're feeling or thinking at that moment, but that is what is required from the role. And I think that is just a little bit of danger. I think most researchers use it well, but I have certainly seen it used in the wrong way as well.
Very interesting. I mean, authentic leadership for me is your best self. We all have a worst self and a best self. And your worst self can come and you can be very manipulative and dynamic and get things done. But your best self, getting things done through that. So that is what I would coin as authentic leadership. But I see your point absolutely. So is this the kind, I'm assuming you say this is the kind of leader we need. Your 4.0 leader, your adaptive leader, and the leader that can bring their full self, their best self to the party. But how big is the gap, if one can even define it somehow, between the leader you describe and that we need and what's actually out there?
I'd love to share something with you. I'm currently doing keynotes around Australia for CEOs and executives. And we're actually looking at what are the three things that are going wrong and what are the three things we can do to fix it. And I might just, if it's okay with you, share something on the screen there to show you how big this gap is, because I've got a wonderful slide that kind of shows what this gap looks like. And if I pull that up for you, well, I think if we start with things that I've already posted on your app, we know that at the moment, with the current leadership we have, that about 40% of the world's leading companies will not exist in a meaningful way 10 years from now. Mm. And that can only be a leadership issue. That can only be leaders who are not thinking adaptive strategy, who's not collaborating, who's not making the connections, who's not adapting, who's not digitally literate. Some authors, it's even worse. They say that almost 3/4 of today's companies will be replaced within 10 years. So I think it's not just a big gap. I think it's a really urgent gap. My research shows that the things people are grappling with from my PhD is complexity. And I'll show you in a moment what that complexity gap looks like. Change, which let's call that adaptation. Global impacts, we've seen that with coronavirus. People, they do not get people, they do not get human. And adapting to context, shifting context. And so that's very much played out in terms of what people say about leaders. So how big is this gap? Well, CCL, Creative Leadership, Center for Creative Leadership, says half of leaders are considered a disappointment, incompetent, a mishire. You know, that's half of leaders. Wow, that is just incredible. Corporate Research Forum, less than 1/3 of respondents thinks that their leaders are good or excellent. Deloitte study, 6% of respondents rate leaders as very ready in their pipeline. We've got Harvard professors saying our current leadership education lacks intellectual rigor. High rate of turnover among leaders. We just have to see big failures in Volkswagen, McDonald's, Westpac here in Australia. And Jeffrey Pfeffer says our workplaces are mostly quite horrible right now. So it's kind of, this is the gap, if we look at real research, the role complexity, the blue has outstripped the adult development, the green. It's about a 3-year gap, according to Theo Dawson, who designed this elliptical model. The numbers on the left is our thinking levels, our adult development levels, 10 being very linear, less mature, less evolved, right up to 12 is kind of where we need to be right now. 12, 13, much more principled, much more leadership 4.0. And the real data shows that from mid-level leadership, we start to see a significant gap. We see toxic, bad leaders everywhere. Lots being written about it. Bad leadership, the allure of toxic leaders, leadership BS, they're everywhere. Men, women, doesn't matter who they are, what culture they're from, what countries they're from. The power just continues to corrupt. And many leaders just continue to create toxic cultures with scattered priorities and unhealthy rivalries and unpredictable conflict. And then finally, leadership development has not delivered.
No.
And there's a plethora of leadership articles around that.
Okay, well, that's the best positioning I've seen of the gap. Thank you for that. You could probably stay here for now, because I think you might just share a few slides in terms of a principle. So my third request of influencers like yourself, Marianne, is that you share a principle or a model or something interesting, a tip for leaders on what they need to do to be more authentic today, tomorrow, now.
I will share. My tip would probably be to build very strong personal agility. It's a program I've just designed, and it's where I start everybody off on, which is made up of 6 things, which I'll talk about in a moment. But let's talk about that, because that for me forms the base of all the other things that a leader has to work on. I'd also say don't try and do it by yourself. Try and do it with others, because it's too complex for one individual to lead in the new world of work. So it's very much a shared leadership approach. So work on your personal agility and work on working with others that complement you and that collaborate with you and that make you smarter and that have different perspectives from you. But I think the first thing leaders have to do is to update how they understand leadership. Leadership in the fourth industrial revolution is not first, second, or third. It's not visionary anymore. It's not transformational. We don't use those words anymore. It's about rapidly aligning and engaging empowered and networked teams, and doing that with a clarity of purpose and a fierce resolve to win. It has moved on from the focus on just culture and those kind of issues. It is much more about shared leadership, much more about empowering people right into cross-functional end-to-end teams. And we are simply not there yet. I still see the hero leader. I still see individuals trying to master complexity by themselves. We're simply not there anymore. And it's at its heart, as Manfred Kester-Fries says, it's about human behavior. And that's why I think personal agility is so important. It's really about human behavior. And I find leaders are very low in their understanding of human behavior in this age where we have to become more human. So I won't go through the detail, but again, in my research, I just show people how to shift from the left to the right, let go of those competencies and trait theories and stop measuring personality and stop building hierarchies and stop giving leadership development to the elite few, and even stop in the middle going for the charismatic transformational leader with a lot of behavioral training that hasn't worked for us, and even more competencies. It's just become more behavioral now. And continue on to lifelong journeys that are complex and social and contextual and agile and adaptive and digital and virtual, and start to be self-authoring. Start to take control of what you think, what you want, what your values are, and start to listen to different perspectives and start to blend those together into holistic systems. Start to reshape those systems. It's not leadership 1, 2, or 3 anymore. And if you look at all of the models out there, everything being used, all the development, it all sits in 1, 2, and 3. It doesn't matter who I talk to. Very few people have shifted. This is my model. So I think personal agility sits in underneath all of these things. It's on the right there. It's less visible. It's much harder to develop. I think if you don't get your ethics and morals right, you can't build trust. If you are not morally mature and you can't do ethical reasoning through competing values, which you will have in the fourth industrial revolution, you'll have AI, you'll have to reskill and upskill your people, you'll have to cut costs and increase performance and outputs. If you don't know how to work through those things in your context, you are not going to be a leader that's trusted. If you can't work on your mindset and become self-authoring, you are not going to make it. You can work on behaviors and competencies till you're blue in your face, but you're not going to get sustained trust, performance, and agility. And I just keep on seeing this. And we don't have a meta model of leadership at the moment. There's still 66 of them. It's incredibly confusing. Every day at the airport, there's about 100 new books at the airport shop on leadership or some kind of great hero leader. And it's not helping us. There's nothing new is coming through. We have to start integrating the models and putting them in the fourth industrial revolution context and starting to build lifelong journeys of learning for people in all kinds of different ways. Okay. And this is what I think personal agility is. This is my starting point. Self-awareness is critical. Grit is critical. Focus is critical. You can't be distracted. You can't take on too much. Emotional agility and being able to shift to more positive mindsets because we have a negative bias. We've seen this coronavirus. People look at what's the worst thing that can happen, and they're planning for the worst thing that can happen. The leaders that can still create hope in these cases and can still work on with the emotions of people, acknowledge them, have empathy, the ones with the growth mindsets and the ones that can build and maintain clear relationships and communication are going to be the ones that are going to outperform the others.
Okay, well, that's really a magnificent expression of not only what leaders should focus on, so that will be very empowering, but it still shows the big gap, doesn't it? I mean, you've clearly shown, again, my second question, how big is the gap? So your explanation here is empowering, and it helps us know where we need to move briefly, but it reminds me again of the big gap. Tell us, finally, globally then, what must we do? to close this gap on a much more broader scale?
I think we've got to throw out what we've done in leadership development and in what we have looked at to assess leaders. We've got to throw out the competencies and the personality tests, and we've got to actually start building personal agility and contextual intelligence in all our leaders at every level. And just start there. Start with growth mindset. If there's nothing else, build growth mindset, grit, and focus. Choose 3 of them. But just start to create cultures that are more gritty, cultures that are more growth-oriented, cultures that really can embed these things. And do it at every single level. Use technology to do it. Do online learning, do micro-learning, curate content for your people. Stop spending millions on expensive leadership development programs for senior leaders. Just get in there and start to do that for people and hold them accountable for their personal agility and for their humanity. And start to, secondly, address the behaviors of bad, toxic, and weak leaders. Stop tolerating brilliant jerks. Start working them out. We've got Atlassian here in Australia has put in their performance management system that they will not tolerate brilliant jerks. So if you start with some very simple things and then start building leadership journeys where you build the ethics and morals, you have conversations about these things. Start having conversations about the right things in your organizations. So really have an OD leadership and assessment and performance effort that starts to shift it towards the culture that really will allow you to be an organization that survives and doesn't just and thrives actually in the new world of work and doesn't just struggle along to stay as one of the ones who make it.
Marianne, I know of a very prominent leader here in South Africa who on Twitter once tried to say to people that he was ready to take over leadership and that he could lead. And I almost took him on in a personal message, or maybe it was even in a live tweet, saying no leader on his or her own is ready in today's world to lead anything like a country. And I think, and then he went offline to have a conversation with me. I don't know if he got what I was saying, but the hero leader is one that says, I have been perfectly prepared to lead South Africa or America or UK in the new after Brexit scenario. When the reality is a leader should almost admit that maybe I'm as good as you can be, but I cannot. No one is equipped to lead today's dynamic environment because no one knows where things are going. So there's that in-between humble but confident leader that says, I need a lot of things to come together to make this work, but I'm willing to go on that journey with you.
Yeah.
And
I think they're just more courageous and gritty. So they're willing to step into the role and harness the right people to learn with them and go on this evolving journey with them. And they're just simply more courageous and more gritty than others. They're willing to, it's like Einstein said, I was just willing to hang in there longer than everybody else with the difficult problems.
Okay. Marianne, Roux, thank you so much. I mean, as always, gosh, you just bring another level to the conversation, and it's exactly what we need. So you keep going on your journey. I'm glad that we've got you somewhere on this platform, to talk about these issues. And we appreciate your time. It's our Global Leadership Conversation 2, and it's part of the Think Lead Global Leadership Platform. And finally, our 2020 DAL vision, the decade of authentic leadership, or 4.0 leader. We have to do something differently in the next decade. Otherwise, I do not know where we will end up in 2030. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.